And having seen previous deals that Israel struck with Hamas, is what price will Israel be willing to pay this time around?
Well, I don't think we're going to see anything close to the 1,000-plus prisoners that were given up in exchange for the return of IDF soldier Gilad Shalit. I think it's going to be a combination of a few things that Israel is willing to give up. Remember here, Israel, more than Hamas, holds the cards in this situation simply because Hamas is in such a precarious situation right now with a humanitarian crisis going on and other international factors pouring down on top of it. I think Israel would be willing, with the help of a guarantor, to help open up the crossings into Gaza, both from Israel and from Egypt as well, if they can get a guarantor to make sure that weapons and other items to help Hamas commit terror activities would not be opened up. I think they'd be amenable to generating more electricity, to helping the humanitarian situation in Gaza, rather than re-releasing the prisoners from the Gilad Shalit deal that were rearrested for committing more offenses further on down the line. I think that is the card that Israel is going to hold. More so than give you back your prisoners, we will help the general population, and that will be item number one, I think, on Israel's concessions list.
Mohammed, would Hamas be willing to accept a deal that saw less prisoners free than, for example, in the Gilad Shalit exchange?
It all depends, and Ayman posed the question about the important question, what would Israel give up, but also the other, I think, in my estimation, important question is, what would Hamas accept? Hamas will be most likely forced to dictate, or at least say that we need the re-release of all the prisoners, Palestinian prisoners who were released during the Shalit agreement, but they were rearrested by Israel. That is a must by Hamas. That is number one. I think Hamas will be more flexible if this deal will include some sort of a lifting of the blockade. They want to only accept that, okay, open the checkpoints or the crossings between Israel and Gaza. They're already open, even though there isn't as much goods going in and out from Gaza or from Israel into Gaza, and vice versa. Hamas is flexible as long as it can ensure the release of the prisoners from the Gilad Shalit's deal, but also lifting the blockade, which will help alleviate the economic and humanitarian situation in Gaza. This way, it could explain itself to the people in Gaza.
Shai, we know that Hamas also responded to these reports, and this comes in a time of extremely high tension between Hamas and Israel on the border anyway.
Right. Of course, there's been several rounds of escalation, you could say, and I don't think this is not related to what we're seeing here. Perhaps all sorts of indications of some sort of progress being made in the context between Israel and Hamas. Here, this particular report about the German context, this is something that goes back apparently 3 years. But in general, we're hearing more and more readiness, I would say, a willingness to move towards some sort of arrangement. And as Mike mentioned, I think that the issue at the top of the agenda for Israel in terms of the concessions it can make, I think that is along the humanitarian measures line. But in terms of the security, the prisoners issue, Israel would have a real problem with releasing those who were rearrested, especially those who have returned on some level to violence. I think that would be a major surprise if it does happen. Israel is more willing to release those Palestinian prisoners it holds who crossed into Israel from Gaza. There have been quite a few in recent weeks with the violence that we've seen. We've seen several infiltration incidents almost on a daily basis. Quite a few Palestinians are now being held in Israel in custody after crossing through Gaza. That would be much easier for them to release, and the officials have said as much.
We must mention that there is a dispute even within the Hamas movement itself. The political part of it is much more flexible than the Al-Qassam Brigade, the military wing of Hamas, who is asking for more Palestinians to be released. They're asking to get more out of this deal than the political arm of the movement.
Now, of course, another factor in all these considerations is public pressure from those Israeli families that are affected by this. Let's listen to a comment that Leah Golden, the mother of one of those soldiers whose remains they're trying to get back, made earlier today on our show Daily Dose to anchor Jeff Smith.
We've been talking about it for the last 4 years. It is about time to change the equation, to flip the equation. Instead of letting the Hamas kidnap our soldiers and demand the price of releasing sentenced terrorists, it's about time to put pressure on Hamas and turn their holding of our soldiers from a burden, from an asset to a burden.
Mike Wagenheim, back to you in Tel Aviv. Obviously, a very heartfelt call from Hadar Goldin's mother. And last time that an Israeli family wanted to bring back their son from Gaza, this kind of campaign worked.
Yeah, but there are differences this time around. We're not talking about a live IDF soldier. That completely changes the context of how much pressure will come from the public. We're talking, unfortunately, about the bodies of 2 dead IDF soldiers. And Leah Goldin, who we just heard from, has already said we should not, Israel, she said we, should not release security prisoners in exchange for getting this body. We just need to turn up the heat on Hamas. So even she's not willing to do that to get her son's remains back. We're also talking about 2 presumably live Israeli citizens, but there's been no proof of life. We don't know if they're alive or not. That would have to be, I'm sure, part of the deal with Hamas, is to make sure that, in fact, those 2 citizens are still alive. So the game has changed from the Gilad Shalit days as to what Israel is willing to give up. And even if Israel knows what it's getting in return at this point, I'm not sure it really does.
Leah Goldin wants Israel to turn the heat up on Hamas, on the prisoners in the jails, on conditions in Gaza, but that does pose, or could pose, some security risks.
It poses security risks, and it doesn't really necessarily sit with the position of the leading figures in the IDF, leading officers. Of course, there seems to be more and more pressure coming from within the army establishment, really, on the levels in the government to make some sort of concession for Gaza in the interest of simply easing the situation and easing the conditions, I would say, in terms of just how much tension there is on the Gaza border. Really, the people in the army that I speak to are constantly repeating the message that certain measures need to be made to alleviate the situation in the Gaza Strip, and this could perhaps not sit necessarily well with the families of those who are held inside.
All right, well, it's a classic dilemma. Shai Ben-Ari, Mohammed Al-Qassem in our Tel Aviv studio. Mike Wagenheim, thank you for joining us.